My name is Grace Yang. To the outside world, I'm a 30-year-old marketing manager with a decent salary and a studio apartment that costs too much and gets too little sun. To my parents, though, I'm not a daughter. I'm Ethan's personal ATM. 3 houses from the demolition buyout, all signed over to my little brother. I didn't say a word. The inheritance waiver. I signed that too. When Ethan started dating, Mom made me send him $300 a month for pocket money. Over the years, I've poured nearly $40,000 into that family. And what did they spend on me? From the day I was dropped at Grandma's house as a colicky infant to the federal loans that put me through state college, I've done the math down to the penny. $5,843.16. That's the price of raising a daughter, apparently. Less than the cost of a used Honda Civic. Then Ethan decided to get married. Mom called me at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night, her voice carrying that particular sweetness she reserves for transactions. The bride's family wanted $38,800 as a traditional gift. They had 8. I needed to come up with the rest. Think of it as repaying us for raising you, she said, as if love were a mortgage and the balloon payment had finally come due. I laughed. I actually laughed. Fine. But I have one condition. I asked for one of those 3 houses to be transferred into my name, the smallest one, the 1-bedroom on Maple Street that Ethan used as a storage unit for his gym equipment. Mom's screech could have shattered glass. Dad called the next morning to disown me. The family group chat erupted with aunts and uncles who'd never spoken to me suddenly eager to explain my moral failings in excruciating detail. The next day, Ethan, sweet, hapless Ethan, who still believes the best of everyone, sent me a screenshot. It was his chat with Mom, dated 3 weeks earlier. "Don't let your sister's money go to waste," she'd written, her words crisp and matter-of-fact. She's a girl. What's she saving for? Sooner or later, she'll belong to someone else's family. Better we use it than strangers. A cold, quiet fury settled into my bones. But before I could process it, another truth surfaced, uglier than the first. That $38,800 for the wedding. The bride's family was only asking for $18,800, with a dowry to be returned. The other $20,000 was a gambling debt Ethan had been hiding for months, a secret rotting beneath the surface of his golden boy smile. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just opened the family group chat, Forever Family, they called it, a name that tasted like copper in my mouth, and pressed the voice message button. You wanted a reckoning. Fine. Let's have one. Part 1, The Ledger. The layoff memo hit my inbox on a Wednesday morning in mid-October, the kind of gray, drizzly day that makes everything feel 10 degrees colder than it actually is. Subject, Organizational Restructuring, Phase 3. I stared at those words until they blurred, my coffee going cold in my hand. 3rd round of cuts this fiscal year. The marketing department was down 40% from January. My name wasn't on the list this time. I'd survived by being competent and invisible, a combination that makes you invaluable and exhausting in equal measure, but the dread coiled in my stomach anyway, a cold, heavy snake that hadn't stopped moving for months. I caught my reflection in the dark monitor during a screensaver pause, pale skin, shadows under my eyes that no amount of concealer could hide, and a constellation of angry red bumps clustered around my lips. Stress acne. Every time the anxiety crested, these little eruptions bloomed like clockwork. I reached for a tube of medicated lip balm, the pharmacy brand, because the good stuff cost $18, and smeared it on with a finger that trembled slightly. 30 years old. I'd been working since I was 22, 8 years of 60-hour weeks and skipped vacations and dinners that came out of vending machines. My reward. A studio apartment in a building where the elevator worked about 60% of the time, a 401k with a balance that would make a financial advisor weep, and a family that saw my paycheck as a communal resource. Money's a bitch to earn, I thought, and even worse to keep when your relatives have their hands permanently in your pockets. My phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a single word, Mom. 10:53 at night. Calls at this hour never brought good news. They brought invoices disguised as conversation, emergencies that somehow always required a wire transfer. I let it vibrate 5 times, my thumb hovering over the green button, my brain already scrolling through the grim mental ledger I'd been keeping since I was old enough to understand that love and money were the same thing in the Yang household. Last month, Ethan needed a new car. His old one, a perfectly functional Honda Accord he'd had for 3 years, was embarrassing him in front of his girlfriend. Mom called me crying about it, actual tears, the kind that made her mascara run, and I'd emptied my savings account. $5,000. 6 months of eating ramen and walking instead of taking the bus. Gone in a single wire transfer. Before that, the down payment on his condo. $8,000, memorialized on a crumpled IOU I'd made her sign while my hands were shaking. She looked at me like I'd asked her to donate a kidney. Your own mother needs to sign a contract, she'd said, her voice dripping with wounded dignity. What kind of daughter asks for that? The kind who's been burned before, I'd wanted to say. Instead, I just held out the pen. And every month, without fail, $200 for Ethan's dating expenses, then $300, because his girlfriend had expensive taste and he wanted to take her to nice restaurants. As if my grown brother were a subscription service I couldn't figure out how to cancel. The phone went dark, then immediately lit up again. She wasn't going to stop. I answered. Grace, why'd it take you so long to pick up? Irritation, as familiar as my own heartbeat. She didn't wait for an answer. Your brother's getting married. I know. Ethan had been dropping hints for weeks, mostly about how expensive weddings were. I'd been bracing for this conversation like you brace for a root canal. The girl's family wants $38,800 for the traditional gift. We've only got $8 saved up. You need to come up with the other $30. She said it the way you'd ask someone to pick up milk on their way home. Casual. Inevitable. The universe's most reasonable request. I closed my eyes. $30,000. $5,000 last month, $8,000 the year before, $300 every month for years. Did she think I had a money tree growing in my fire escape? That my modest salary somehow multiplied in my bank account like yeast in warm water? Mom, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. I don't have $30,000. The silence that followed was the particular silence of someone recalibrating their approach. I could almost hear her flipping through her mental playbook, anger, guilt, tears. Which lever would work best on the daughter who'd never been able to say no? She went with anger. You don't have it, or you just won't give it. Her voice climbed into the register I privately called the dog whistle, the pitch that meant someone was about to be accused of being an ungrateful child. You make nearly $4,000 a month. What have you been doing with all that money? Throwing it away on that ridiculous apartment in the city? You should be living somewhere cheaper and sending more home. I live in a 300-square-foot studio with a bathroom that smells like mildew and a kitchen where I can touch both walls at the same time, I said, my voice still calm, still measured. There's nothing cheaper unless I move into a cardboard box under the freeway. Don't be dramatic. Your brother needs this money. The wedding is in 3 months. What is he supposed to tell his fiancé's family? I could think of several things. The truth was at the top of the list, but I knew better than to suggest it. In Mom's world, the truth was something to be managed, massaged, and occasionally buried in a shallow grave. "Think of it as repaying us for raising you," she said, shifting to the guilt lever with practiced ease. "Everything we sacrificed. All those years. We fed you, clothed you, put a roof over your head. Is this how you show gratitude? Repaying us for raising you?" The phrase landed in my chest like a stone dropped into deep water. I'd been hearing it my whole life, in 1,000 different variations. Every birthday gift I'd been told I didn't deserve. Every school achievement dismissed while Ethan's mediocrity was celebrated. Every dollar I'd earned since my first minimum wage job at 16, somehow already earmarked for the family account. But this time, the phrase triggered something else. A memory. Ethan's text from yesterday, the screenshot he'd sent with no explanation, as if he'd wanted me to see it but couldn't bring himself to say why. I pulled up the image in my mind, the words burned there like a brand, asterisk, "Don't let your sister's money go to waste. She's a girl. What's she saving for? Sooner or later, she'll belong to someone else's family. Better we use it than strangers." Asterisk. My mother's words. Crisp. Practical. Utterly devoid of love. A strange, bitter laugh bubbled up my throat. I didn't try to stop it. "Fine," I said. "I'll help. But I have one condition." Her voice swung from venom to honey so fast I got emotional whiplash. "What condition?" "Tell me, sweetheart." "Anything." "Sweetheart." She hadn't called me that since I was 7 years old. "Transfer one of Ethan's 3 houses into my name. The small one on Maple Street. Just sign it over to me, and I'll figure out the 30,000. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick and pressurized, the held breath before a tornado. I could feel her mind churning through the possibilities, not with guilt or self-reflection, but with the sheer affront of it, a daughter, asking for bricks and mortar. A daughter, asking for something real. When she finally spoke, her voice had climbed 3 octaves into a territory usually reserved for funeral wails and natural disasters. "Those are your brother's houses. What does a girl need a house for? You're not married. You don't have children. What would you even do with property?" "Live in it," I said. "Rent it out. Sell it. Whatever people normally do with houses." "Absolutely not. Those houses belong to Ethan. They're his inheritance, his future, his security. You can't just take them." I didn't raise my voice. I just started counting. "When Ethan bought his condo on Oak Street, I gave you $8,000 for the down payment. Do you remember that? That was a loan. We said we'd pay you back. You haven't paid back a cent. When he needed the new car, I emptied my savings account for $5,000 more. And every month for the past 3 years, I've been sending $300 for his expenses. Do you know what that adds up to, Mom? Over the years, I've handed this family nearly $40,000. Don't throw numbers at me like that's supposed to mean something. And do you know how much you've spent on me?" I continued, my voice still quiet, still steady, the calm of someone who's already done the math and doesn't need to shout to prove it. "From the day you left me at Grandma's house when I was 6 months old, to the student loans that put me through college, every dime you've ever spent on me, I've tracked it. I've got spreadsheets going back to elementary school. The winter coat you bought me when I was 12 that was 2 sizes too big so I could grow into it. The sneakers that gave me blisters because you bought them on clearance and they didn't come in my size. The one time you took me to the doctor when I had strep throat and complained about the copay the whole drive there. I paused, letting the silence stretch. $5,843.16. That's the total. That's what it cost to raise your daughter. And you're telling me I've paid that back almost 7 times over. So when you say I owe you for raising me, I think we're square, Mom. I think we've been square for a long time. In fact, by my math, you owe me. I heard her mouth open. Close. A strangled, wet sound, like a fish gasping on a dock. You've been keeping a spreadsheet. What kind of person does that? What kind of daughter keeps a running tab on her own parents? The kind who had to, I said. The kind who learned early that love in this family came with a price tag. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. But beneath the adrenaline, beneath the terror of having finally said it all out loud, there was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my lumpy futon with the manila envelope in my lap, the one I'd been filling since I was old enough to understand that memory was unreliable and love was conditional. The one I'd never shown anyone, because showing it would mean admitting that I'd been keeping score, and keeping score meant admitting that something was fundamentally broken. The first item in the envelope was the IOU. Crumpled once by Mom's hand, then smoothed flat by mine. In her wobbly cursive, the kind of handwriting that comes from never having to write anything important, I owe my daughter $8,000. Signed, Margaret Yang. No date. No repayment terms. Just a scrap of paper that had cost her nothing to write and had cost me everything to demand. I still remembered the look on her face when I'd handed her the pen. That mixture of shock and contempt, as if asking for a signature was a betrayal of the natural order. Your own mother, she'd said, her voice trembling with theatrical hurt. You don't trust your own mother. I trust you, I'd lied. I just want it in writing. She'd signed it like she was signing away her dignity, then balled it up and threw it at me. There. Happy now. You've got your precious piece of paper. Frame it and hang it on your wall. I'd picked it up off the floor, smoothed it flat, and tucked it into this envelope. I didn't frame it. But I kept it. The second item was a sheaf of bank statements, years of them, each transfer circled in red ink with careful annotations in my tiny handwriting. Ethan's down payment. Ethan's car. Ethan's living expenses. Ethan's emergency that turned out to be a spring break trip to Cancun. Page after page, a river of cash flowing in one direction, never circling back. The third item was the spreadsheet that had so offended my mother. I'd started it when I was 14, sitting at Grandma's kitchen table with a stubby pencil and a notebook. At first it was just a way to keep track. The school supplies I bought with babysitting money, the school lunch account I funded myself, the winter coat I'd begged for and finally received, 2 sizes too big and the wrong color, because it was on clearance and, beggars can't be choosers. Over the years, the notebook became a computer file, and the file became an obsession. Every birthday check that never cleared. Every promised, we'll pay you back, that never materialized. Every time Dad said, family helps family, and meant, you help us and we help Ethan. The total at the bottom hadn't changed in years, $5,843.16. That was the price of raising a daughter in the Yang household. Less than the cost of a used car. Less than what Ethan spent on his emergency trip to Cancun. Less than a third of what they were now demanding I hand over without question. I'd been staring at the numbers for so long they'd stopped meaning anything, just black marks on white paper, when my phone buzzed again. Not a call this time. A text from Ethan. I almost deleted it without reading. I was too raw, too exhausted, too full of the words I'd finally said to absorb anything else, but the preview caught my eye. It was a screenshot. I opened it with a thumb that felt numb. The image was a conversation between Ethan and Mom, dated 3 weeks ago. Mom's messages were on the right side of the screen, gray bubbles filled with her usual stream of consciousness barrage. Asterisk, how much does your sister have saved up? She's been working for years, she must have something put away. Asterisk. Ethan's reply, asterisk, I don't know, Mom. She doesn't tell me about her finances. Asterisk. Mom, asterisk, well you need to find out. That wedding isn't going to pay for itself and your father and I can't carry the whole thing. Asterisk. A pause. Then, the words that would change everything. Asterisk, don't let your sister's money go to waste. She's a girl. What's she saving for? Sooner or later she'll belong to someone else's family. Better we use it than strangers. Asterisk. Ethan hadn't replied to that one. Maybe he'd felt guilty. Maybe he'd just gotten distracted. Either way, he'd sat on this screenshot for 3 weeks before sending it to me, and he'd sent it without comment, without context, without apology. As if he wanted me to see it but couldn't bring himself to explain why. I stared at the screen until the pixels burned into my retinas. Better we use it than strangers, that was what my mother thought of me. That was what my entire family thought of me. I wasn't a daughter, I was a temporary custodian of assets that rightfully belonged to them, a brief stop on the way to some future husband's household. My money wasn't mine. My life wasn't mine. I was just a holding pattern, a waiting room, a girl who'd been born into the wrong family with the wrong gender and had been paying for that mistake ever since. For years, I'd felt a low, chronic ache about my family, a bruise I kept pressing to see if it still hurt. This was the moment the bruise turned into a scar. Cold. Numb. Permanent. Something shifted inside me that night. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn love that was never going to come, like pouring water into a sieve and wondering why it stayed empty. I'd given them my savings, my peace of mind, my dignity. I'd signed their waivers and accepted their excuses and swallowed their insults until my throat was raw with them. No more. The realization settled into my bones like cold water finding its level. I wasn't angry. Anger is hot and volatile, quick to flare and quick to burn out. What I felt was something deeper and more permanent. A frozen, crystalline clarity. The books were finally balanced, and they told a story I could no longer pretend not to understand. I wasn't their daughter. I was a long-term, low-investment, high-yield asset. And the dividend checks had just stopped clearing. Part 2. The Inheritance. To understand my fixation on those 3 houses, you have to rewind 7 years. I was 23, fresh out of state college with a degree I'd paid for myself and a job that paid $32,000 a year before taxes. I was living in a studio apartment so small that my bed folded into the wall and my kitchen consisted of a mini fridge and a hot plate. I was broke, exhausted, and still naive enough to believe that if I worked hard and was good, someone would eventually notice. That was the year the city decided to build a new highway through our old neighborhood. The government bought out the Young family property at a premium, and suddenly my parents, who'd spent my entire childhood complaining about money, were sitting on a windfall. For apartments in a new development on the north side of town, with modern appliances and parking spaces and actual central heating. 4. A clean, even number that should have made division simple. But the assignment papers Ethan posted in the family group chat told a different story. 3 apartments in his name. One in our parents. Mine wasn't on any of them. Not even a footnote, not even a mention. It was as if I'd been erased from the family register, a clerical error in human form. I called Mom that night, my voice carefully neutral. I'd learned by then that showing emotion was a tactical error. It gave her something to push against, a weakness to exploit. Mom, I saw the property distribution. I was just wondering, is there a reason my name isn't on any of the units? Oh, Grace. Her voice was soothing, almost tender, a rare, dangerous thing that I'd learned to distrust. It's just for now. You know how these things work. Ethan's a boy. He needs property to attract a wife, to carry on the family name. What girl would marry a man with no assets? But don't worry, he'll take care of you. You're his big sister. He'll always have a room for you. Always have a room for me. Like I was a distant cousin who might visit for the holidays, not a legal heir who'd been systematically disinherited. Shouldn't I at least have one of the units in my name? I pressed, hating how small my voice sounded. Just for security. I'm not saying I need to live in it. I just want. Security for what? You're 23. You've got your whole life ahead of you. You'll get married someday and your husband will provide for you. That's how it works, Grace. Girls don't need property. Girls need husbands. I closed my eyes. The bedroom wall of my studio was so thin I could hear my neighbor's television, a late-night talk show with a laugh track that felt like mockery. Mom, I'm not sure I'm going to get married. And even if I do, shouldn't I have something of my own? Something that's just mine. You sound like one of those feminists from your college. Her voice had hardened, the tenderness evaporating. I knew we shouldn't have let you go to that school. It filled your head with nonsense. Next you'll be telling me you don't want children. Let me go. I repeated, a bitter taste in my mouth. You didn't pay for any of it, Mom. I took out loans. I worked 3 jobs. You didn't let me do anything, I did it myself. See? That's exactly what I mean. That school made you hard. Made you forget where you came from. The Grace I raised would never talk to her mother this way. The Grace she raised. As if she'd been the one making my school lunches and helping with my homework and teaching me how to navigate a world that saw me as less than. As if she'd been the one who held me when I cried. But that wasn't Mom. That was Grandma, who'd been dead for 2 years by then, and whose absence was still a raw wound I pressed on in quiet moments. I'm the same Grace, I said quietly. I just understand things better now. Understand what? That you're ungrateful. That you don't appreciate everything we've done for you. I understand that you've never seen me as a full member of this family. And apparently, the law agrees with you. She'd hung up on me then. And 3 days later, Dad showed up at my apartment with a legal document, a waiver of inheritance rights, already filled out, just waiting for my signature. It's just a formality, he'd said, standing in my doorway without coming in, like he was afraid my poverty might be contagious. For the lawyers. Makes everything cleaner. I read the document carefully, every word. I was signing away my right to any claim on the family property, present or future. I was agreeing that the 4 apartments belonged to Ethan and my parents, and I had no interest in them. I was, in the eyes of the law, voluntarily making myself an orphan. Dad, I said, and my voice only wavered a little. If I sign this, what do I get? His expression flickered, confusion, then something that might have been guilt. What do you mean, what do you get? You get to help your family. You get to do the right thing. Isn't that enough? The right thing. The right thing was giving my brother everything and myself nothing. The right thing was smiling while I was erased. I signed. My hand was steady, but I could feel something inside me cracking, a fault line spreading through whatever was left of my childhood faith that my parents loved me. I handed the paper back to my father, and he nodded once, just once, like I'd passed a test I didn't know I was taking, and left without another word. I closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cheap hollow wood. I didn't cry. I was too hollow for tears, too emptied out to produce anything as substantial as grief. I just stood there, breathing, while the laugh track from my neighbor's television filtered through the wall. And Ethan took care of me, all right. That was what Mom had promised, wasn't it? That my little brother would look out for me. That he'd always have a room for me. That family took care of family. 2 years later, when he bought his condo on Oak Street, he called me in tears because the bank wanted a bigger down payment and he was short $8,000. "I'll pay you back, Grace. I swear. It's just a loan." I'd been saving for a new laptop. Mine was held together with duct tape and prayer, but I sent him the money anyway. Family takes care of family. The next year, when his girlfriend said his Honda was embarrassing, he called me again. $5,000 to upgrade to something sportier. "She's the one, Grace. I can feel it. Don't you want me to be happy?" My savings account, which had just started to recover, went back to zero. Every month since then, $300. Sometimes more, when there was an emergency, or a special occasion, or just because Mom called and said he was struggling and didn't I want to help. I gave and gave and gave, waiting for the moment when someone would give back. That moment never came. When Mom shrieked, "Those are your brother's houses," into the phone, it didn't wound me the way it might have once. It just confirmed the math I'd already done in my head. I was an investor who'd been pouring capital into a venture that would never pay dividends. The only question was whether I'd keep throwing good money after bad, or finally cut my losses. Part 3, The Reckoning. Less than half an hour after I hung up on Mom, Dad's name blazed on my screen. I knew the script before I even answered. It was the same script he'd been using my whole life, a combination of bluster and guilt and the particular kind of patriarchal fury that comes from being challenged by someone you've always considered beneath you. "Grace." His voice was a thunderclap, loud enough that I held the phone away from my ear. "What did you say to your mother?" "She's lying in bed right now crying her eyes out. Her blood pressure is through the roof. Do you want to put her in the hospital? Is that what you want?" I sat on my futon, the envelope of evidence still in my lap, and felt a strange detachment settle over me. I told her I didn't have $30,000 to give to Ethan. And I told her that if she wanted my help, she'd need to transfer one of his properties to my name. "Transfer," he sputtered, genuinely speechless for a moment. "Those properties belong to your brother. They're not yours to bargain with." "They're not his either," I said. "They were acquired through a government buyout of family property. I was part of that family. I had rights to that land too." "Rights? What rights?" "You're a daughter. When you marry, you'll join your husband's family. Your name won't even be Yang anymore. Why would you have rights to Yang family property?" The logic was so circular, so perfectly self-contained, that I almost admired it. So because I might get married someday and change my name, I deserve nothing. Even though I was born into this family just as much as Ethan was. Don't twist my words. Your brother needs those apartments. He's going to have a family of his own to support. What do you need a house for? To live in. To have security. To own something that's mine and that can't be taken away from me. Security. He laughed, a harsh bark that held no humor. You want to talk about security? Your mother and I gave you security for 18 years. We put a roof over your head and food on your table and clothes on your back. No, I said quietly. Grandma put a roof over my head. I put food on my own table with my after-school job. And the clothes on my back came from Goodwill. You and Mom showed up on Christmas and birthdays with presents for Ethan and a lecture for me about how expensive I was. There was a pause, a dangerous pause, the kind that comes before an explosion. How dare you, he said, his voice dropping low. How dare you throw your grandmother in our faces? We made the decision to send you to her because we couldn't afford 2 children in the city. It was a sacrifice for us too. You think we wanted to be separated from our daughter? You seem to manage it pretty easily, I said. You never came to visit unless there was a holiday. You never called unless you needed something. The only time I heard from you growing up was when you wanted me to know how grateful I should be. Ungrateful brat, he spat. This is what we get for trying to do right by you. This is what we get for making sure you had a roof over your head and an education. Dad, I paid for my own education. I'm still paying for it. My student loans are going to follow me into my 40s. You didn't contribute a dime to my college fund. You used that money to buy Ethan a car instead. I hadn't meant to bring that up. I'd buried that particular betrayal years ago, the day I'd found out that the college fund my parents had always talked about didn't actually exist, or rather, it had existed, but it had been drained when Ethan turned 16 and needed a car to impress his friends. I'd gotten the news in an email from Mom, delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she might use to announce a dentist appointment. We had to use your college money for your brother's transportation. You understand, don't you? He needs to be able to get to school and work. I'd read that email in the library at my community college, where I'd just applied for my 3rd part-time job to cover the tuition my scholarship didn't. I'd closed the laptop and sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screen, feeling something inside me calcify. Ancient history, my father said now, his voice tight. You're still holding grudges about things that happened a decade ago. I'm not holding grudges. I'm just keeping track. And the track record shows that every time I've given this family money, I've been told it was a loan. Every time I've been promised repayment, it's never come. I'm done being the family bank. Fine. His voice went cold and hard, the voice of a man who'd rather lose a daughter than an argument. If that's how you feel, then you're not our daughter anymore. From this moment on, you're not a Yang. Don't call us. Don't visit. You want to be independent so badly. Go ahead. See how far you get without a family behind you. Dad. Don't call me that. I'm not your father. No daughter of mine would be this cold, this calculating, this selfish. You're dead to us, Grace. Dead. The line went silent. I sat there in my tiny studio, the phone still pressed to my ear, listening to the dial tone drone. Outside, the city hummed on, indifferent to the fact that a father had just erased his daughter from existence with 5 sentences. A siren wailed in the distance. Someone was laughing on the street below. Life continued, as it always does, regardless of the small apocalypses happening in individual hearts. 26 years of being a Yang. It had taken less than 10 minutes for it to end. The strange thing was, it didn't feel like a loss. It felt like an amputation of a limb that had long since gone gangrenous. You don't mourn the removal of something that was poisoning you. You just feel the sudden, shocking lightness of its absence. I was still sitting there, phone in hand, when the Forever Family group chat detonated. My Aunt Linda struck first. She was my father's older sister, a woman whose entire personality was built on a foundation of other people's business. She'd never worked a day in her life. Her husband was a mid-level manager at an insurance company, but she considered herself an expert on everything, particularly on how other people should live their lives. She sent a voice message that clocked in at nearly a full minute. I didn't listen to it. I knew what it would sound like: the breathless indignation, the theatrical concern, the barely concealed glee at having fresh drama to dissect. Instead, I tapped transcribe and watched her words scroll across my screen like a slow-motion train wreck. Grace, I just heard from your mother what you said to her. I cannot believe you would treat your own parents this way. Your father has high blood pressure. Do you even care about that? Your mother was in tears. Real tears. After everything they sacrificed to raise you, all those years of putting food in your mouth and clothes on your back, this is how you repay them. By demanding your brother's property. Kids these days have no sense of gratitude. No sense of family obligation. When I was your age, I would never have spoken to my parents the way you spoke to yours. Never. I hope you're proud of yourself, Grace. I really do. Because you've broken your mother's heart, and I don't know if she'll ever recover. I read it twice. Then I typed my reply. Aunt Linda, when Dad was in the hospital 2 years ago with his heart episode, I called you. Do you remember that? I called you and asked if you could come help take care of him, just for a weekend, just so Mom could get some rest. You told me your arthritis was acting up and you couldn't make the drive. 2 days later, you posted photos on Facebook of yourself at a casino 3 hours away. Standing. Smiling. Drinking margaritas. I hit send, then continued typing. When I asked if you could help with his medical bills, just a small loan, I said, anything you could spare. You told me you were strapped for cash. The very next week, you bought my cousin a brand new Jeep Wrangler for his graduation. I saw the photos. The big red bow. The whole production. So forgive me if I don't take lectures on family obligation from someone who couldn't be bothered to visit her own brother in the hospital. The typing indicators in the group chat flickered and died. For a long moment, there was nothing. I could imagine her staring at her phone, mouth open, trying to formulate a response that would make her look like the victim. Before she could recover, my Uncle Robert decided to wade in. He was Mom's younger brother, a man who'd coasted through life on charm and borrowed money. His particular talent was for saying the most condescending things in the most reasonable tone, as if he were doing you a favor by explaining why you were wrong. Let's all calm down, he wrote, his message appearing in the chat like an oil slick spreading across water. Grace, I understand you're upset, but families shouldn't keep score like this. When Ethan does well, you benefit too. That's how families work, we share in each other's successes. Holding on to resentment like this only hurts you in the long run. I felt my lip curl. Uncle Robert, of all people, lecturing me about not keeping score. Uncle Robert, I typed, my fingers moving fast and sure, you're right. Let's talk about not keeping score. When Grandpa died, he left his house to be divided equally between his 3 children, you, Mom, and Aunt Sarah. But somehow, by the time the estate was settled, you had the house entirely in your name. Mom got nothing. Aunt Sarah got nothing. Just you. I paused, letting the words land. The chat was completely silent now. No one was typing. No one was breathing, as far as I could tell. You told everyone it was because you'd been the one taking care of Grandpa in his final years, so you deserved it. But I was there, Uncle Robert. I was the one driving Grandpa to his doctor's appointments every week because you were too busy. I was the one picking up his prescriptions and making sure he ate something besides TV dinners. You showed up for the funeral in a new suit and took the house. If not keeping score means you get everything and everyone else gets nothing, then you've got the best deal in the world. But don't stand there and tell me it's about family loyalty. It's about greed. It's always been about greed. The chat was a tomb. No one responded. No one defended him. No one defended me. The dozens of relatives who'd been so eager to witness my humiliation had suddenly remembered urgent appointments elsewhere. Mom, seeing her reinforcements routed, finally entered the fray herself. Her voice message was long and wobbly, recorded through what sounded like genuine tears. I raised a heartless wolf, she sobbed. I gave her everything, and she repays me with cruelty. I should have known when she was a child. She was always so cold, so distant, never wanting to hug me or tell me she loved me. I should have known she'd turn out like this. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I transcribed it, screenshotted it, and forwarded it to Ethan with a single line of text. This is what our mother says about me. Remember this the next time you ask me for money. Ethan called me that same night. His voice was buttered with false contrition, the practiced tone of someone who's been caught and is trying to manage the fallout. Sis. Grace. Look, I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. Mom was out of line. What she said in that message was horrible, and I'm sorry you had to see it. Really, I am. I stayed silent. I'd learned over the years that silence was more effective than any accusation. People hate silence. They rush to fill it, and in their rushing, they reveal themselves. Listen, he continued, his voice cracking slightly, about the money. I know 30,000 is a lot. It's a huge ask, and I feel terrible even bringing it up after everything that's happened. But, what if we made it 20? Just 20,000. I'll figure out the rest on my own. I'll get a second job, I'll sell some stuff, whatever it takes. I just need a little help to get over this hump. 20,000. Not 30. The discrepancy snagged in my mind like a fishhook. Mom said the bride's family wanted 38,800, I said, keeping my voice neutral. If they're asking for 38,800, and you need 30 from me, that means you've only got 8 on your end. But now you're saying you can make it work with 20 from me. So which is it, Ethan? How much does this wedding actually cost? The pause that followed was a fraction of a second too long. I mean, the exact number is still being negotiated. There's the traditional gift, but then there's also the banquet and the dress and the... Ethan. I cut him off, my voice sharp as a blade. What's the real number? The actual bride price, without the padding. Another pause. I could hear him breathing, could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he tried to calculate his way out of the corner he'd backed himself into. 18,800, he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. The bride's family is asking for 18,800. And they're returning 10,000 as a dowry. So it's really only going to cost about $9,000 out of pocket. $9,000. He'd been asking for 30. He'd been asking for more than triple the actual cost. Ethan. My voice was very calm. Too calm. The calm of someone who's just discovered a truth so ugly it can't be processed all at once. If the wedding only costs 9,000, why were you and Mom asking me for 30? It's not what you think. What is it, then? What do you need the extra $20,000 for? The silence stretched. 10 seconds. 15. I could hear him breathing, could hear something that might have been a muffled sob. Sis, I messed up. How badly? Badly. Really badly. His voice cracked, and when he spoke again, it was with the broken, desperate honesty of someone who's run out of lies. I've been gambling. Online poker, mostly. It started as just a couple $100 here and there, nothing serious. But then I lost a big hand and I thought I could win it back, and I kept chasing. I kept thinking the next hand would turn it around. Ethan. I know, okay. I'm an idiot. I'm a complete and total idiot. I've lost almost $20,000. The sites, they let you play on credit, and I kept thinking I'd win and pay it all back, but I just kept losing, and now the debts are due and I don't have the money, and if I don't pay, the collectors are going to start calling my work and my girlfriend's family and... Stop. I said the word with enough force that he actually stopped, his rambling cut off mid-sentence. You're telling me you've gambled away $20,000. $20,000 that you don't have. And you and Mom cooked up this story about the bride price to try to get me to cover your losses. It wasn't, Mom thought. Mom thought what? That I was a bottomless pit of cash. That I'd just hand over $30,000 without asking any questions. That I've been so well trained over the years that I'd never push back. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Ethan, do you know how many hours I worked last year? Do you have any idea? I logged over 2,600 billable hours. That's 50 hours a week, every week, no vacations, no sick days. I ate most of my meals at my desk. I haven't been on a date in 2 years because I'm too exhausted to even think about meeting someone. And for what? So I could hand my savings over to my brother to pay off his gambling debts. Grace, I'm sorry. No. I cut him off, my voice hard and final. You're not sorry. You're not sorry you gambled. You're not sorry you lied. You're only sorry you got caught. If I hadn't pushed back, if I'd just handed over the $30,000 like a good little sister, we wouldn't be having this conversation at all. You and Mom would have taken my money and never said a word about where it really went. That's not. Don't lie to me, Ethan. Not anymore. I've been lied to by this family my entire life. I've been told I was loved when I was being used. I've been told I was valued when I was being exploited. I've been told I was part of this family when every single action has shown me that I'm nothing but a resource to be extracted. I took a breath. My hands were shaking, but my voice was steady. You want to know the worst part? If you had just come to me and told me the truth, if you had said, Grace, I messed up, I have a gambling problem, I need help, I would have helped you. Maybe not with money, but I would have helped you find a program, helped you talk to a counselor, helped you figure out how to dig yourself out. I would have been your sister. But instead, you and Mom decided I was easier to deceive than to trust. You decided I was worth more as a mark than as a family member. Grace. We're done, Ethan. You, me, Mom, Dad, we're done. I'm not your ATM anymore. I'm not your safety net. I'm not your backup plan. Whatever mess you've made, you clean it up yourself. Consider it the first step toward becoming an actual adult. I hung up before he could respond. Then I sat in the dark, my whole body trembling, and waited for the guilt to hit. The guilt that always came whenever I stood up for myself, the voice in my head that sounded like my mother telling me I was selfish and ungrateful and wrong. But it didn't come. For the first time in my life, the voice was silent. All I felt was a strange, hollow calm, like the eye of a hurricane passing overhead. Part 4, The Rupture. For 2 days, my phone stayed quiet. No calls from Mom. No texts from Dad. No desperate messages from Ethan. The silence was so complete that I almost let myself believe they'd actually heard me, that my words had landed somewhere and taken root. I should have known better. On the 3rd night, Ethan's message arrived. A long, carefully typed paragraph, far too articulate for someone who'd barely scraped through community college. Sis, I've been doing a lot of thinking these past few days. You're right about everything. I messed up, and I'm sorry, truly sorry. But I've learned my lesson, I swear. I've deleted all the poker apps from my phone. I'm never gambling again. The loan sharks keep calling, and Mom's so stressed she can barely eat. I know I don't deserve your help, but please, for the sake of the years we grew up together, give me one last chance. I promise I'll pay you back. I read it 3 times. Each time, a different phrase jumped out at me. I've learned my lesson. A lesson learned in 3 days. After losing $20,000. After lying to his entire family. People don't learn lessons that fast. They learn consequences. And Ethan had never faced a real consequence in his life. The years we grew up together. We hadn't grown up together. I'd grown up at Grandma's house in a different town, in a different school district, in a different universe. The only time Ethan and I had spent together was the occasional holiday where I was trotted out like a distant relative and expected to entertain my little brother while the adults talked. We hadn't shared a bedroom or a bathroom or a single significant childhood memory. We were siblings on paper, strangers in practice. And that phrasing, the years we grew up together. It wasn't Ethan's voice. He would never put it that way. He'd say something simpler, more direct, we're family, or remember when we were kids. This was Mom's language. Mom's emotional manipulation. Mom had dictated this message, or written it herself and made him copy it. The realization made me feel something I hadn't expected, not anger, but a profound, bone-deep weariness. Even now, even after everything, they couldn't just be honest. They couldn't just say, we're in trouble and we need help. It had to be a production. A manipulation. A scheme. I typed my reply with a thumb that felt heavy as lead. Your one last time is like a broken clock. It's always striking midnight. The answer is no. The moment I hit send, my phone erupted. Mom. Dad. Ethan. Mom again. Dad again. A 3-way relay race of desperation, each call coming before the previous one had even finished ringing. I watched their names flash on my screen, Mom, Dad, Ethan, Mom, Dad, like a slot machine that only paid out in guilt. When the calls finally stopped, the texts began. Mom, pick up your phone right now. This is not a request. Dad, you're being childish. Answer your mother. Ethan, sis please I'm begging you. Mom, Grace if you ever love this family at all you'll call me back. Mom, the loan sharks are threatening to come to the house. Is that what you want? Your parents terrorized. Mom, I didn't raise you to be this cruel. I don't know who you've become but you're not my daughter. And then, the message that finally broke through my numbness. Mom, if you still think of me as your mother, help your brother. This is the last thing I will ever ask of you. Please. If you still think of me as your mother, using motherhood as a bargaining chip. Making her identity as my parent contingent on my willingness to open my wallet. It was hostage-taking, pure and simple, with our relationship as the victim. I picked up my phone with hands that were suddenly very steady. I typed slowly, deliberately, choosing each word with care. Mom, the question isn't whether I think of you as my mother. The question is whether you've ever thought of me as your daughter. A mother doesn't scheme behind her daughter's back to extract money from her. A mother doesn't tell her son to take whatever he can get because she's just a girl. A mother doesn't spend 26 years treating one child like a prince and the other like a walking checkbook. You stopped being my mother the moment you started seeing me as a resource instead of a person. You don't get to play that card now. I hit send. Then, before I could second-guess myself, I blocked their numbers. All three of them, Mom, Dad, Ethan. My thumb hovered over the confirm button for a long moment, 26 years of programmed guilt screaming at me to stop, to apologize, to fall back in line. The good daughter. The obedient daughter. The daughter who didn't make waves or demand fairness or expect to be treated like a human being. I pressed the button anyway. The screen went dark. The weight that lifted from my chest was so physical, so immediate, that I had to put my phone down and press both hands flat against my thighs to steady myself. My heart was racing, but not with fear, with something that felt almost like hope. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't waiting for the next demand, the next emergency, the next guilt-laden phone call. I had drawn a line in the sand, and for once, I hadn't let them push me across it. Part 5, The War. The next morning, I took a half-day off work and drove to the county recorder's office. I'd been thinking about this for years, turning the idea over in my mind like a stone I couldn't stop touching. The property distribution from the demolition buyout had never sat right with me. For units allocated based on family size. I'd been part of that family on paper, but somehow not part of it when the assets were divided. The clerk at the recorder's office was a tired-eyed woman in her 50s with kind wrinkles around her mouth and a nameplate that read Linda Martinez. She listened to my story without interrupting, her expression carefully neutral. "Let me make sure I understand," she said when I'd finished. "Your family's property was acquired by the city for a highway project. You were given 4 replacement units. But your name wasn't on any of the titles, and you signed a waiver of inheritance rights at your parents' request." "That's correct. And now you're wondering if you have any legal standing to contest that distribution." "Yes." She leaned back in her chair, tapping a pen against her desk. "The answer is complicated. The waiver you signed is a legally binding document. You voluntarily gave up your claim to the property. That's not easy to undo." My heart sank, but I kept my expression neutral. "However," she continued, "if you can demonstrate that you signed the waiver under duress, or that you were materially deceived about its implications, you might have grounds to challenge it. Do you have any evidence that your parents misled you about the waiver's purpose or pressured you into signing?" I thought of my father standing in my doorway, the document already filled out. Asterisk, it's just a formality. For the lawyers, asterisk, I thought of my mother's voice on the phone, sweet and dangerous, asterisk, you're my daughter. I would never hurt you, asterisk, I thought of the years since, the money that had flowed in only one direction, the promises that had never been kept. "I might," I said. "I need to look through some things. Take your time. And Ms. Yang." She leaned forward, her voice dropping slightly. "I see cases like this more often than you'd think. Family property disputes. Siblings ridden out of wills. Parents who favor one child over another. It's ugly, and it's painful, and it usually doesn't end with everyone holding hands around a campfire. Are you sure you want to go down this road?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. The legal fees. The family drama. the permanent scorched earth. Was a one-bedroom apartment on Maple Street worth losing whatever shreds of my family still existed? Then I thought about the screenshot. Asterisk, she's a girl. What she's saving for? Asterisk, I thought about my empty savings account and my maxed out credit cards and the student loans I'd be paying until I was 40. I thought about my father's voice telling me I was dead to him. I thought about my mother's manipulation, my brother's lies, the decades of being treated like an investment that was supposed to yield infinite returns. I'm sure, I said. Linda Martinez nodded once, a brief, professional dip of her chin. But I caught something in her eyes, a flicker of recognition, maybe even approval. Then you should talk to a lawyer who specializes in property disputes. I can give you a few names. I left the recorder's office with a list of attorneys in my pocket and a strange, unfamiliar feeling in my chest. It took me a moment to identify it: determination. For years, I'd been passive, reactive, letting my family's demands dictate my choices. Now, for the first time, I was taking action on my own behalf. On the drive home, I called Ethan. It went to voicemail. He was probably screening my calls now, the way I'd been screening his, but I left a message anyway. Ethan, it's Grace. I'm going to say this once, so listen carefully. You once told me you'd thought about giving me one of those apartments, that you'd even argued with Mom about it. I don't know if that was true, or if it was just something you said to make me feel better while you kept cashing my checks. But if you meant it, if there's any part of you that actually wants to do the right thing, then now's your chance. Transfer the Maple Street unit to my name. Do it voluntarily, and I'll help you figure out the gambling debt. Not by giving you money, I'm never doing that again, but by helping you find a program, talk to a financial counselor, whatever you need to actually fix the problem instead of just plugging the hole. But this is a one-time offer, and it expires in 48 hours. I paused, considering whether to say the next part. I said it anyway. If you don't take this offer, I'll pursue the property through legal channels. I've already talked to the county recorder and I'm meeting with an attorney next week. I don't want to drag this family through court, Ethan. I really don't. But I'm done being the only one who sacrifices. I'm done being the only one who gives. Either I get what's fair, or I'll fight for it. Your choice. I hung up and dropped the phone on the passenger seat. My hands were shaking again, but my mind was clear. The message had gone out. The ball was in his court. Whatever happened next was up to him. Mom found out within minutes. Ethan, the fool, had probably forwarded my voicemail to her the moment he finished listening to it, still convinced that she would know what to do, still unable to make a decision without her input. He was 28 years old and he still needed his mother to tell him how to think. Her call came through on a number I didn't recognize. She must have borrowed someone else's phone, knowing I'd blocked her. I answered without thinking, and her voice hit me like a physical blow. Grace. Are you even human anymore? Your brother is drowning, and you're circling like a vulture, trying to steal his house while he's down. What kind of monster blackmails her own brother? I pulled over to the side of the road. I wasn't going to have this conversation while driving. It's not blackmail, Mom. It's negotiation. And I'm not stealing anything, I'm asking for what should have been mine from the beginning. The Maple Street unit was empty for 2 years before Ethan started using it as a storage locker. He doesn't live in it. He doesn't rent it out. He doesn't even maintain it. That's not the point. The point is that it belongs to him. It has his name on the deed. You have no right. I have every right, Mom. I was a member of that household when the buyout happened. The compensation was calculated based on family size. My existence increased the payout. And what did I get for that? Nothing. Less than nothing. A waiver that made sure I could never claim what was mine. You signed that waiver. Nobody forced you. Nobody forced me, but nobody told me the truth either. Dad said it was a formality. You said you would never hurt me. And I believed you both, because I was 23 years old and I still thought my parents loved me. My voice cracked slightly, but I forced it steady. I know better now. The silence on the other end was so complete that I checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. Then I heard her breathing, ragged and uneven. "What happened to you?" she finally whispered. "You used to be so sweet. So obedient. You never talked back. You never made demands. What happened to my little girl?" "She grew up," I said. "She grew up and realized that being sweet and obedient just made her easier to exploit. She realized that family is supposed to go both ways, and in our family, it only ever went one. We gave you everything. You gave me the bare minimum required to keep me alive, and you made sure I knew I should be grateful for it." Meanwhile, Ethan got cars and apartments and $300 a month in pocket money from his big sister. "Do you see the imbalance, Mom? Can you really not see it? I see a daughter who's become selfish and cold. I see a daughter who's turned her back on her own blood. Then we're seeing different things. I see a woman who's finally learned to value herself. And I see a family that never valued her at all." I ended the call. Then I blocked the new number and continued my drive home, my hands steady on the wheel, my heart beating slow and sure in my chest. The old guilt was still there, somewhere in the background, a radio playing in another room. But it was getting quieter. With every boundary I set, every word I spoke, it grew a little fainter. Part 6, The Aftermath. A month later, I stood in a small, wood-paneled courtroom on the 3rd floor of the county courthouse. I was the plaintiff. The defendants, Margaret Young and Ethan Young, didn't show. Their lawyer did, a harried-looking man in a rumpled suit who argued that the waiver I'd signed was perfectly legal and that my claim to the property was baseless. He was good at his job, I'll give him that. But I had something better than a good lawyer. I had documentation. The bank statements, years of them, showing a one-way river of money from my account to my family's. The IOU, still bearing my mother's signature. The screenshot of her message to Ethan, "She's a girl. What's she saving for?" Which my attorney had argued demonstrated a pattern of financial exploitation and gender-based discrimination. And the spreadsheet, my careful, obsessive spreadsheet, which laid out in cold hard numbers the truth I'd always known but never been able to prove, that I'd been an investor in a family that had no intention of ever paying dividends. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and a no-nonsense expression, reviewed the evidence carefully. She asked pointed questions. She examined the waiver with a magnified lens, reading every line. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured and calm. The court finds that while the waiver signed by the plaintiff is technically valid, there is substantial evidence that it was signed under conditions of informational asymmetry and emotional coercion. The plaintiff was not given full disclosure of the property's value or her legal rights at the time of signing. Furthermore, the pattern of financial transfers documented in the evidence suggests a long-standing expectation that the plaintiff would provide economic support to the family without reciprocal obligation. She paused, looking over her glasses at the defense attorney. The court orders that the property known as Unit 3, 218 Maple Street, be transferred from Ethan Young to Grace Young within 60 days. The court further orders the defendants to pay the plaintiff's legal fees in the amount of $4,200. This case is closed. The gavel came down with a solid, final thunk. I won. Walking down the courthouse steps under a thin October drizzle, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt hollow and strange, like a bell that had been rung so hard it was still vibrating. A legal victory doesn't stitch a family back together. But that family had never been whole to begin with. It was a machine designed to extract from me and pour into Ethan, and I'd finally thrown a wrench into the gears. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, letting the rain mist my face, watching the traffic slide by on the wet streets. A woman walked past with a little girl holding her hand, the child's rain boots splashing in puddles, her laughter bright and uncomplicated. I watched them until they disappeared around a corner, and I thought about my grandmother. About her kitchen with its checkered tablecloth and the way she hummed when she cooked. About how she'd been the only person in my childhood who'd ever made me feel like I was enough. My Gracie, she'd called me. My good girl. That evening, back in my studio, I rummaged through the bottom drawer of my desk and found an old photograph. It was creased and faded, its colors leaching into sepia, but the image was still clear, a gap-toothed 7-year-old girl in a too-big dress, cradled in the arms of a silver-haired woman on a porch swing. Behind them, a big elm tree, its leaves just beginning to turn. Grandma was laughing at something, her head tipped back, her arms wrapped tight around me. And I was beaming at the camera, one front tooth missing, utterly secure in the circle of her love. On the back, in her spidery handwriting, my Gracie, my good girl. Summer 2001. I slid the photo into a new frame, one I'd bought at the drugstore on the way home, nothing fancy, just simple black wood, and set it on my nightstand. She was my real family. The only one who'd never kept a ledger. The only one who'd loved me without a price tag. I turned off the light. Outside my window, the city glittered in the rain, 10,000 anonymous lights stretching toward the horizon. For the first time in my life, I knew with absolute certainty that one of those lights belonged entirely to me. It wasn't much, a rented studio, a modest salary, a one-bedroom apartment that would be mine in 60 days. But it was a foundation. The first thing I'd ever built on my own. I closed my eyes. Somewhere in the dark, a voice, my own, steady and sure, whispered, *, you are enough. You always were, *. The rain tapped against the window like a benediction. And for the first time in longer than I could remember, I slept without dreaming of drowning.